Today, we're diving into the really profound and honestly deeply interconnected relationship between law and virtual reality. This entire explainer is based on the fantastic work of Professor Kiskinov. His ideas are going to challenge some of our most basic assumptions about what law even is and what it can do. So, to really get this connection, we have to start with a pretty fundamental question. Most of us think of law as this set of pre-existing rules that we just discover and then apply to keep society in order. But what if that's not the whole story? What if law is actually more like architecture, something we actively design and build from scratch using abstract ideas? And as I mentioned, it's Professor Kiskinov's work that provides the framework for this whole discussion. He's really our guide through this complex and ever-changing landscape. All right, so here's our game plan for this journey. We've got 5 key stages we're going to walk through. First up, we'll look at this idea of a law that actually builds things. Then we'll see how that shows up in the virtual world. After that, we'll explore the ideal way these two can interact, check out the benefits they give each other, and finally, we'll wrap up by looking at how law's very function is evolving in this new digital age. Okay, let's jump right into our first section. This is the core idea, really, that law functions as an architect of its own reality. Now, to really get a handle on this, we need to be clear on a key term: jurisprudence. Don't let the word intimidate you. It's not about memorizing specific laws. Instead, think of it as the science of law itself, its core theories, its philosophy, basically what makes law, well, law. And this is where Professor Kiskinov's argument gets really transformative. He posits that jurisprudence doesn't just stumble upon a legal system that's already there in society. No way. Instead, the very act of studying law constructs the thing it's studying. It builds the norms, the concepts, the whole structure right out of abstract ideas. And this whole construction thing, it happens in 2 steps. First, jurisprudence comes up with the methods to actually build the legal system, to define what a right is or what a contract means. It's only after that act of creation as a second step that it can turn around and develop ways to analyze the very system it just brought into existence. So, this idea that law builds its own reality, it becomes crystal clear when we move into our second section and start looking at how law operates inside virtual worlds. When law first started dipping its toes into the virtual world, it wasn't some grand unified system. It was pretty scattered, actually. Think about the rules for e-commerce, or those early e-government services, or the first platforms for sorting out disputes online. These were all just separate pieces, the early building blocks of a brand new legal reality. And this immediately created a kind of friction, a real tension. On one hand, you had traditional law, built on these established human-focused systems that change really slowly and deliberately. And on the other hand, you had this new tech world, which was all about rapid, automated, and often really disruptive innovation. What happened then? Well, for a long time, law was basically stuck playing catch-up. It followed this reactive cycle. First, some new tech would pop up. Then, society would start using it. Inevitably, conflicts and disputes would arise. And only then, after the fact, or as the lawyers say, ex post facto, would the legal experts step in to try and regulate it. For a long while, law wasn't leading the charge, it was just trying to keep up. But this brings us to a really important turning point in the story. People started to realize that law and virtual reality weren't just clashing. Actually, they share something incredibly deep, a fundamental common ground. And this right here is the core insight. Think about it. Legal concepts like ownership or duty, they're totally abstract, right? They're ideal constructs. They don't physically exist. Well, a virtual reality is, by its very definition, an entire environment built from pure information, another abstract ideal construct. It's the shared non-physical nature that makes them so uniquely compatible. And because they share this common foundation, you start to see this really powerful two-way relationship develop. Law and virtual reality don't just exist side by side. They actually start to enrich and empower each other. It's a symbiotic relationship. So let's look at how VR helps out the law first. In a virtual world, you can make legal rules universally accessible, and you can automate their enforcement. The systems are inherently orderly, which is a huge plus. And here's the kicker. Every single action generates data. This creates a perfect, complete record that lets us study how effective our laws are and even run brand new kinds of experiments. But it's not a one-way street. Law gives virtual reality a purpose that goes way beyond just the technology itself. It brings in social goals, for instance, allowing institutions like e-government to actually work. It establishes public value. It Well, it socializes these purely technical spaces and transforms raw code into a real tool for the public good. So, putting all this together brings us to our final section, a fundamental shift in what the function of law even is. And here's the ultimate takeaway. Law is moving on from its old job as a reactive regulator, just cleaning up messes from the past. In this new virtual environment, it's becoming more like an engineering tool, a proactive instrument we can use to design and build the kinds of digital public worlds we actually want to live in. This massive paradigm shift leaves us with a really profound question to think about. If law now has the power to construct new realities from the ground up, then we have to ask ourselves, what kind of digital world should we instruct it to build?